Hey everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Yak with Mac. Today I got to speak with the VP of IT Development, Ronke Equincy. And I have to tell you and ask you this question. Do you believe data can change the world? Listen in. Hey there, everybody. This is Kenny back with another edition of the Yak with Mac. I told you so. I told you I would have just outstanding, inspirational guests this year. I know some of y'all didn't believe me, but my first guest of the year, I can't wait to get right to her. She has got just some inspirational things and some great leadership tips to share with us today. I was so privileged and honored to meet her about a week or so ago. LinkedIn is a powerful thing, and I'm just so glad that that is somebody that also worked with the company. So I want to introduce the Vice President of IT Development, Ronke Equincy, to the podcast. Ronke, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. How are you?
I'm doing well, Kenny, and thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. It's exciting to have you. Let's jump right in because there's so much I want to get to with you today, but I'd love for you to walk through your career journey first because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that people can take away from your journey, and you can go back as far as you want or as short as you want, but walk us through your career journey.
Yeah, so I like to say that I grew up in technology, but then I took a bit of diversionary routes along the way so I could learn stuff. So I started out my career really as an entry-level IT person that was really mainly focused on application development back in the day when you wrote code and you didn't really buy a whole bunch of software. And I started my first job out of college was actually working for Hewlett Packard. And while I didn't go to school for technology, if you work for a company like HP, they turn you into a technologist because that's what they do, and that's the core of their business. And at the time, I really was very open to learning. And as I sort of look back, I go, that was probably something that I've kept through my entire career journey. So I started in technology, working out of a Hewlett Packard office in New York. Spent 5 years there in different increasing responsibilities. And the reason why I got those increasing responsibilities was I just raised my hand. If there was a problem, I wanted to be part of it and help solve it. And then moved on to Sony Electronics, which was a completely different industry, and realized that part of what I enjoyed doing was not only delivering solutions, but really learning new industries. And so early in my career journey, I'd made a decision that every time I pivoted, I would pivot to a new industry because I wanted to have the opportunity to immerse in the new industry. And so, I went from consumer electronics to public utilities, to consulting, and then I spent a very long time in the pharmaceutical industry. And
Wow.
as I was doing technology implementation work and application and development, I started to move into management roles. And when you move into management roles, you really get an opportunity to really start talking about business problems as opposed to just, here's the technology, but here are the business problems that we're trying to solve. And I actually happened to be working at Ernst & Young, helping them with some application implementation. And we realized that a lot of the issues had to do with the business process, turned out to be data related, document related at the time. And the timing, I'd say, was just sort of a confluence of events where there was a new onslaught of regulation that affected particularly the public accounting companies. This is when Arthur Andersen sort of went down and SOX became a regulation, and the firm came to me and said, well, you've been making noise about our practices for quite a while now. Do you think what happened at Arthur Andersen can happen here? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And they said, help us solve it. So that was sort of my first pivot out of tech into more so information and business process in the adjacency with policy and regulation. And so that took me through a little bit of a diversion where, I spent quite a bit of time working with lawyers and speaking the language of regulation and also the language of technology. And as data continues to become a lot more ubiquitous and highly regulated, I found myself in increasing roles of data management. Fast forward to T-Mobile. I'm running data for T-Mobile.
So that's an amazing journey. And I loved everything you said, but what I found probably the most interesting is you really clearly defined how once you moved into management, there was a greater responsibility, on your shoulder there. And then obviously you rose to that challenge for this other firm to say, hey, wait a second, can what happened over there happen here? And we need you to really help fix that. It's just an amazing journey that you've had. Any lessons along the way aside from what you just shared?
I think the one lesson that I will say that I learned is sometimes we have a vision for ourselves, and sometimes other people have a different vision for us that we cannot see. And so I was fortunate enough early in my career for where senior leaders would come to me and say, you really need to consider gaining this experience, taking on this role, because it will round out your experience. And I'd say be open to that, because there were a couple of jobs that I took because an executive sponsor or somebody that I think about now as a sponsor of mine came to me and said, you're excellent here, but if you want to get to the next level, try this role for a while.
Wow, that is really interesting. And then to go ahead and take that plunge, that takes a lot sometimes, right? To then go ahead and say, well, it's not something I really was planning on doing, but okay, I trust this person that mentioned it. That is awesome. Well, I want to really get into a few other things with you here. And I was sent an article by a colleague of mine that I saw your name on, and this is how I said, man, this person works for us. But you talked about data, and I'll just say the first thing because I really want you to expand. You talked about how every company should have a chief data philanthropist, and I thought that was just it caused me to pause, and then you went on to really talk a lot about how we should be using data for a lot of different things and for the good. So I want to give you plenty of space to talk about that because it's such an I had not thought about data in that way before. So what did you mean by chief data philanthropist?
Yeah, so I'll start that by attaching it a little bit to my career journey, right? A while ago, another individual that I looked up to quite highly was talking about this concept of a pinnacle role. So her definition of a pinnacle role was the role from which you sunset your career. And the advice was, once you define your pinnacle role, every job that you take from this day forth ought to be moving you towards that pinnacle role. So it challenged me to think, where do I want to sunset my career? And how do I take what I know and what I've been doing to get me to that place? That's when the idea, and I started to at that point hear about this emerging field of data philanthropy, which is data as philanthropy. So it anchors on a couple of principles. And the first principle is that data is malleable, which means that you can use it for multiple purposes. And the second principle is that it's non-rivalrous, which means that if you use it for multiple purposes, they don't necessarily conflict with each other, right? And I've spent a lot of time, and I continue to in my career, to help companies use data for commercial purposes. But that same data can be used for broader social good. And there are plenty of examples. If you were to just Google mobile data for social good, you'll find plenty of examples as to how call detail records have been used for things like disaster relief, refugee support, etc. And so I thought, well, how do we begin to have that conversation within corporations? Because a lot of the conversations we have about data right now are things like, well, the company is using my data for something that an individual feels is more of a creepy factor, or, data is being breached, or, those sort of, conversations are happening, but we're not telling enough of the story as to how we're using it to drive greater societal good. And so then the idea came to mind of like, what if that was somebody's day job? What if all they did was
Wow.
like work in a company to go, how can I help you use your data to do to really change the world in a good way? And you can do both, right? You can use the data to make money, and you can also use it to do good. And the data itself doesn't diminish in value. So that was really the vision for the role of a chief data philanthropist.
That is, I mean, that I never thought of anything data related that way before, and I think that what you said, and one of the other things you said is that you want to use data to really save the world, and that's a powerful statement, and you just had so much to back it up. But tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
So I've given let me just give I think what may be a bit of a debatable but a very recent example, right? Um, we are living in the middle of a global pandemic.
Mhm.
And one of the things that it was pretty, yeah, I'd say pretty contentious in the beginning was this whole notion of contact tracing. But contact tracing really does help, right? Contact tracing is stuff that you can do manually or stuff that you can do with data, right? And it gives a view and it helps to prevent the spread of disease. So if you think about it, that's one application where you can use data to really help truly save lives, right? Um,
Wow.
and it's not data that was intended for that purpose, right? Because it's proximity data that is, or geolocation data that is being collected for something else that can be used for contact tracing. So it's those sort of examples, and there are plenty of them out there. Again, I'll say, um, just a simple Google of data philanthropy or mobile data for social good, if anybody's
Mhm.
interested. And it's not just mobile data; they're companies. That are using things like rideshare data to deploy the resources into communities for safety.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh, that is so great. So you said something that was dead on a few minutes ago about how kind of the reputation is okay using data to spy or creep into our lives and things like that. So and that's probably a perception that's out there. How can we change that perception to have more of the perception that you have? What are some things that we can do to really to just change flip that script a little bit?
Yeah, I think that I look at it as say like they're just imagine two glasses. Um, One is half full and the other is half empty. You just fill the other glass with more stories. So we need to create those opportunities where we share data, where we leverage it for specific use cases. And then we need to highlight those. And you have then an opportunity to say, well, let me tell you how um, data was used to help survivors of this hurricane, right? And that's a different conversation. It doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean that you take away all the other discussions, because I think those will all continue to take place. But you really need to have give people an opportunity to tell a different type of story and the examples and give them the examples that they can use.
Yeah, and that's so practical. And this is a great place to start because I'm blessed that we have several people that are going to watch this and hopefully spread this within our company and our realm. You've really caused me to do some thinking, as well as I think a lot of people that have read that on LinkedIn and everything. It's just outstanding, outstanding advice, and just an outstanding perspective that you have. I want to shift gears as much as I hate to, but I have to take advantage while I have you here to talk some leadership. And when we spoke last week, you really had some great practical hints and tips for leaders out there. So I'll start with just the two questions. And what are some things that you're seeing leaders do extremely well out there today? What are some things you'd like to see leaders change, particularly here in 2022?
Yeah, so I always say people don't listen to what you say, they listen to what you do. And as a leader, our obligations are to model the behaviors that we expect of others. And that's, yeah, and the folks that I work with, when we get into these leadership meetings and there are different discussions that take place around how we, what we should be doing, the way I typically interpret that is, here are the 3 or 4 things that I'm going to model because my team needs to see me model them, right?
Mhm.
For them to be able to then begin to model them themselves, right? Because sometimes I think we think that leadership is about just defining vision and getting people to do work, but it's really about not just defining vision, but showing your staff and your team how you expect them to behave, and you're not exempt from that. So, I would say that, and then I challenge my peers and I challenge myself that it's in the micro choices that we make and how we interact with people, right? Make those choices and be deliberate and intentional about them.
Mm.
And if you do that, I think how you show up is authentic.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, how do you come up with those 2 or 3 things? You mentioned, maybe 2 or 3 things that you zero in on to model. Does that just depend on who your team is at that time? Is it something that are non-negotiables for you? How do you come up with those 2 or 3 things that you want to model?
Yeah, so I think it's contextual, and it depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish and who your team is at that time, right? So there are, I think we all have core things that we believe are core principles. But so, for example, one of the things that I try to do is, as a leader, is to be open and available to everybody in my organization. So, I put that out there and I model it. And literally there have been times where I tend to get into the office really early, where I'm in my office really early and I've got a lot of work that I'm trying to do, and somebody shows up at my door really early and they go, "Hey, do you have 15 minutes?" And yeah, I go, but yeah, of course I've got 15 minutes. Come in, and it may end up taking 30 minutes, but modeling those or is important to me. And so people begin to go, "Yeah, she's got an open door. You can just go in and talk to her."
That is awesome. That is so awesome. Uh, you spoke to me about it, and we'll start to wind down here, but this really struck me when we spoke last week about what you do daily and making that decision daily. Talk a little bit more about that, because I just thought that, especially for new leaders, Ronke, starting out, I thought that was just phenomenal advice. Talk a little bit about your daily routine.
Yeah, so I tell people that I believe that all life is choice and all life is practice. And so you literally are what you practice, and in every moment you make choices. So I said I'm an early riser. Um, I'm now on the West Coast, but I keep an East Coast body clock deliberately because it gives me time in the
Yeah.
morning to just center and focus and plan my day. So I start my day with a little bit of meditation, and then, I think about the things that I'm going to do at work for that day. And then I remind myself that, what I want to do is just really be intentional in all the things that I do daily, right? And so it's in that centeredness that I start my morning, and then I get into the office somewhere between 6:30 and 7 o'clock, and
Wow.
I start my day.
Wow. That deliberateness and the decision making, I love that you said that. And and to me, that takes out the excuses. If I'm running a team in a call center or I'm running a retail store, what I still hear a lot is that, hey, I'm just too busy, But you getting up just that little bit extra early, probably in your case is a lot extra early, but also being very, very intentional and making that decision, on what you're going to do today. Anybody can do that.
Yeah, anybody can do that. And there are things, there are things that I don't make time for. Like one of the things that I'm always curious when people say to me, "Where do you find the time?" And I'm like, well, there's some things I just don't do. We all have the same 24 hours. And so I may choose to not watch any television that day because I'm making time for something else. Um, and now, I recognize people are in different stages of life, and there are times where there are things that are much more demanding, but you have to make time for those things, right? If you are a young parent, you have to make time for your children. But it also means that you're choosing, at least you have to think about it as you're choosing not to make time for other things. And I think there's a lot of power and choice. And if you recognize that you have that power to choose, and you always in every situation have agency, you would. I just ask people to choose carefully.
Wow. Wow. I have nothing to add. That is just such great advice. I just have one last question for you, and that is, at some point, maybe in the next couple of months, can I get you to come back on? Because
Oh,
I feel like we
absolutely.
just scratched the surface. I think there's so
Absolutely.
much more we could talk about.
Yeah, totally.
Um, but thank you so much. You've given so much great advice, and I'll post some links out there on the Google searches that you advise when I post this video, and so folks can easily go in and they'll see exactly what you were talking about. But I can't thank you enough. I know how busy you are, and it just was outstanding for you to give us this time. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Oh, thank you so much. Well,
All right.
folks, this has been Kenny and Ronke. This has been the Yak with Mac. We will talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.